We're finally here. We're going into piece 7, and we're going to get an overview of the sequence playing out. Piece 7 is effectively a knowledge check. It's a study check. And it's you, once again, understanding what your role is during piece 7 to get your mitigations out on schedule. Up to this point, in different parts of the encounter, I've emphasized, please, please, please study your mitigation. And it's not enough to study the mitigations. Throughout the course of the videos, I've also emphasized like different parts and different aspects of the encounter where you stand to benefit in doing certain parts, certain kinds of camera work, certain ways of moving about, so that you can calculate the encounter very, very quickly. Um, but once again, I cannot stress this any harder than I already am. If you fail to mitigate properly for piece 7, you almost assuredly will get everyone killed. The reason being is because on the healer side of things, the healers are typically comfy, but in a scenario where you have healers seeing piece 7 for the first time, they're going to be in a position where they're going to actively try to understand where and how much damage is going out and what resources and tools they're going to need. Um, And I have been in scenarios, even as experienced as I am now on healer for P7, where we go through the sequence on P7, and because a DPS missed a mitigation or more than one DPS, or somebody misses a tool, a mitigation tool, I'm going into the second half of P7 with virtually no mana and no more resources because I blew everything up to try to keep the party alive to get us this far. Um, Your healers and your tanks have major responsibilities in P7. As a DPS, your main responsibility is to make sure you're in position when it's your turn to bait your cleave. As long as people understand what they need to do for mitigation, you will guarantee the party will be alive at least. And then the rest of the work for P7 is effectively just positioning on both tank side and party side of things. Before going into going over P7, I'm going to do real-time callouts for P6. So currently we're looking at the POV of looking at Thordan after he comes back from the Tank Buster on just after Meteor Sequence on Doff for P5 of DSR. I'm going to let this play in real time. We want to see the Buster on transition to the map. We're going to pot, and I'm going to start the callouts now. Pot. Two-minute. Positions. Akh 1 incoming. DPS away. DPS spread. G1 to the north. G2 to the south. Akh 1. Excellent. Tanks far, party close. Tanks far, party close. Val pass. Hit Fressfelker. Roth flames. Okay. Uptime. Party to 4. Mitigate. Chains at the wall. Hot wing in. Chains at the wall. Hot wing in. Spread. Use your eyes. Val pass. Group 1 to the north, Group 2 to the south, Akh 2. Blow up Restfelger, eyes on Restfelger. Party close, tanks far, hot wing in. Party close, tanks far, hot wing in. Val pass. Two-minute. Party north. Cauterized incoming. Party north. Respect pyretic. Respect pyretic. Party north for touchdown. Val pass. Blow up the dragon. Party to 1. Tanks will be on Alpha once we go into P7. Heal through the bleed. After the second bleed falls off, we're going to do party mitigation. Not yet. Heal through the damage. Mitigate. Tanks on Alpha on top of each other. Make sure stance is on both of you. Tanks on Alpha on top of each other. Make sure stance is on. And those were the calls for P6. So from here on, I'm going to slow down the playback. And we're going to see the entirety of P7, preferably in one shot. And I'm just going to narrate over what's happening. This sequence is not complex. You just have to keep your head cool, stay focused. And I'll share a few little positioning tricks for both tanks and the party to help them out. So right off the bat, as I was saying during the call out, on transition into P7, it is absolutely important that both tanks have stance on, both tanks get on top of each other, and both tanks stand on the alpha marker, A marker. As a tank, your responsibility is going to be to position ideally on a red marker throughout P7. You do a major mechanic and you are main threat, you're on a red marker. You exit another mechanic, another major mechanic, and you're off to the side. Your job is to get back on a red marker when you're main threat. Reason being is because, as we'll see shortly, Thordan will cast Exaflare's Edge, which is like if you've done UCOB, it's just a bunch of Exaflares that are going off on the floor. You want to point Thordan on a red marker in preparation for any Exaflares so that you make the visual cues for the rest of the party very easy to figure out where the quote-unquote safe spot is going to be for the Exaflare's Edge. And additionally, with Exaflare Edge, there is a quote-unquote brain-dead movement that you can do to trivialize that mechanic and make it a non-mechanic in practice. But right off the bat, going into P7, tanks must have stance on. They must be on top of the alpha marker. When Thordan is casting something, whether it's Exas or Akh Morns or Gigas, he stops moving. So as a tank, what you're waiting to do is you're waiting to see that cast bar appear on Thordan, and then that's your signal that you can start moving around freely. I'm gonna let this play out. And so Thordan is going to spawn. The party is hitting him. And another note too. Our 1 minute, our 2 minutes kind of come back around this time. You do not want to spend them right this moment. You actually hold your 2 minutes for later on in the phase, and I'll specify when. But tanks are on top of each other. I'm actually going to slow this down just even a little bit more. Tanks are on top of each other. We're waiting for that cast bar. As soon as that cast bar appears on Thordan, the tanks are good to move. And here we go. Exaflare's Edge is casting. And this is how you resolve it. So with Exaflare's Edge, it's very simple. As long as the tanks are pointing Thordan on a cardinal, preferably on a red marker, the mechanic will resolve such that when it comes to movement, what you're aiming to do is you're aiming to pop sprint, and I highly, highly recommend that you just pop sprint for every single Exaflare's Edge. Thordan's mechanics are spaced out such that he goes through a cycle of Exaflare, Akh Morn Edge, and Gigas, and he goes back to Exaflare. The cycle between Exaflares or any one cycle, I should say, is about 72 seconds. Your sprint has a cooldown of 60 seconds. So if you pop sprint for Exaflare's Edge, you are always going to have it for Exaflare's Edge. You don't have to worry about saving your sprint for anything other than making sure that you have plenty of movement tools in preparation for Exaflare's Edge. So Thordan is casting Exaflare's Edge. There's one more cast, but I'm not going to pay attention to right now, or rather a telegraph. What will need to happen for Exaflare's Edge is you see the party is clumped up nice and tight together. We're going to pop sprint. And what we're going to do is we're going to book it to this little beam of light. This is your first step in the Exaflare. So your step 0, you are here. Step 1, you are here. You're aiming for this to position your body on this where this little beam of light is placed. And then for step 2, you are going to move such that you position your body just immediate to this diamond right here at the outskirt, right where I'm drawing this circle. This will be step 2. This is the Braindead movement. You go from step 0 to 1 to 2, and then after 2, you move back into the hitbox, and then you're done. You've dodged Exaflare, and you're good to go. And you quite literally do this for every single Exaflare. So I'm going to let this play out so we can see it in slow-mo. We're currently prepping. And you'll notice, as far as camera work is concerned, what I like to do personally is I like to tilt my camera overhead so I know exactly where I'm going. Once again, visually, what I'm going to do is I'm popping sprint, and I'm going to aim to be at that little beam of light. That's the first step. And then as soon as I move there and then the Exaflares flash, I'm going to book it and move so that I position my body over here. This is step 2. As long as I do that, I do the Braindead movement for Exaflare, and I'm done. Now, I'm going to emphasize this as we see this further into Exaflare's Edge. I am glossing over some details. They're not important right now. We're just focusing on the movement for Exaflare's Edge. So once again, I like to pan my camera overhead. I pop sprint. I'm just waiting for this cast bar to finish. So that's another thing too. The snapshot happens once the cast bar ends. Do not move prematurely. Do not sit there for too long and then move. If you do either, you are almost guaranteed going to die to the Exaflares. What you're waiting to see happen is you're waiting for this cast bar to finish, and then you move. Don't move earlier. Don't move too late. You have to get a fix for the timing. So the cast bar is finishing. Sprint is active. And so I move into the first beam of light. And then now that we're here in position on the first little beam of light, and notice how nice and tight we are, most of us are going to move over here. That's our next target. Okay. boom. As soon as we see that second set of Exaflares flash, we're moving in. Some people are really good. Like Solara, the scholar in this party, is really good and very well experienced. They know how to read the Exaflares in such a way that they just maintain uptime. For a first time attempt, I recommend you just do the brain dead movement. If you feel confident and well enough that you won't get yourself killed in uptime, that's a decision that's solely up to you, especially if you want to throw away 14 minutes of everyone else's life. But I will leave that to you. Some people are able to calculate uptime for Exaflares. And I think it's just something that you will have to make a decision for yourself. Uptime is not needed for Exaflare dodge, but some people are able to calculate it just fine. And then that's it. That's how you do Exaflare dodge. There's nothing to it as far as that mechanic goes. Now, going back, what you'll notice is when Thordan's casting a major mechanic, Exaflare's Edge, Akh Morn Flare's Edge, or Gigaflare's Edge, his swords are also going to glow. Right now, you're going to see Thordan's sword glow blue. They're going to be covered in ice, as we can see here. What Thordan is telegraphing as he's preparing the major mechanic, in this case Exaflare, it doesn't matter, but as Thordan is preparing a major cast, he will telegraph to you and tell you if you need to be inside his hitbox or outside his hitbox. Right now, Thordan is telling us we need to be inside of his hitbox before the snapshot of the cast bar ends for this major mechanic. So what you're going to see, knowing this information now, the party is going to move inside of his hitbox. And I really have to emphasize that. The swords are glowing in ice. They're covered in ice, and we're inside the hitbox. And then we resolve the major mechanic. If his swords are covered in fire, you have to be outside of his hitbox. And the snapshot of the in and out is exactly his hitbox. So that's something you need to be very mindful of. After we resolve Exaflare's Edge, what needs to happen immediately is tank 1 and tank 2. We can see they're marked currently. They need to book it and make it to the other side of Thordan as fast as possible. And melee 1, wherever melee 1 is, I can't see it in the pile. Melee 1 also has to book it and make it inside dead center into Thordan's hitbox. Reason being is because after every major mechanic, Thordan will do a set of baited cleave. The cleaves from his sword in each hand cleave top 2 threat. So the top 2 enmity will get hit. So typically it'll be tank 1 and tank 2 are getting hit. The tail will also cleave, and the tail that Thordan has a sword that targets based on proximity to Thordan's hitbox. So with tank 1, tank 2 positioning away from the party and also away from each other so they don't break cleaves on top of one another, melee 1 is booking it and making their way dead center in the hitbox to bait the tail cleave. The sequence for the mechanics is going to be melee 1, melee 2, and then for the next major mechanic, when we get to the cleaves, it's going to be range 1, then range 2. And then for the third major mechanic, it's going to be healer 1, then healer 2. And then the cycle repeats. For the next cycle, when we see Exaflare's Edge again, it's going to be melee 1 once again, melee 2, and then we keep repeating until we're done. We're done with P7. So we just got through Exaflare's Edge. The tanks are booking it. They're hauling ass. They're trying to get away from the party as fast as possible. And melee 1, the ninja, as we can see here, they're kind of obstructed, but melee 1's already in position too. When we see this in real time for the playback, you're going to see how quickly the movement actually is, because we're playing at quarter speed right now. But tanks are in position. Main threat is on alpha, pointing Thordan to a red marker, and then the first set of cleaves are out. And then you can see here that the Reaper, the ninja's moving out, and then the Reaper is moving in. The Reaper's moving in to bait the second cleave. Meanwhile, the healers just need to make sure the tanks don't drop dead of damage. So melee 1 did their cleave, melee 2 does their cleave. And now we move into Akh Morn Edge towers. So the typical setup for Akh Morn Edge, and then I'll try to illustrate this in paint, is very simple too. As I said, P7 is not a difficult phase. It really is just people having nerve that end up messing them up. So here is Thordan's hitbox. Here, let's just pretend he's pointing this direction. What Thordan is going to do is he's going to spawn 2 towers to his left, 1 tower to his left, 1 tower to his right, and then 1 tower at his rear. What the party's going to have to do is group 1 is gonna be in the tower to Thordan's left. Group 2 is gonna position to the tower on Thordan's right. And the tanks, both tank 1 and tank 2, are gonna position on the tail tower. What you need to know is the tail tower does a lot of damage, so the tanks are soaking that tower. Group 1 and group 2, once they're in position, it's just a matter of positioning correctly, because remember, for every major mechanic, Thordan is telegraphing an in or an out. So depending, if we're in or out, we will move accordingly. But this is a heal check more than anything for the first Akh Morn Edge. If Thordan is casting in so that everyone has to be inside the hitbox, we're gonna be positioned and we're gonna be close enough while soaking these towers that the healers are gonna be in range of healing everyone. So we'll be okay. Now, the only complication to all this is when we have to resolve an out. So, the inside of the hitbox is unsafe. At this so once Akh Morn Edge finishes casting and he does the initial hit from the snapshot, we are gonna be outside the hitbox. It is important as soon as the first hit lands from Thordan's snapshot, that we move inward to be in range of the healing. If we do not move inward, let's pretend I'm a white mage and I'm up here outside the hitbox. I won't be able to reach the tanks from over here, and I won't be able to reach party group 2 from over here. We all have to move in after taking the initial hit in order to be in range. Otherwise, we're going to have a lot of problems. The other thing too with Akh Morn Edge that's very helpful to know is if for some reason people were dying going into this phase and we have less bodies, a healer LB3 will not save us, because effectively if a healer is locked up by healer LB3 going into Akh Morn Edge, they're not doing healing. And it's a tremendous amount of damage. So the play is usually for recovery on Akh Morn Edge, if people die to Exaflares, is to prepare the tank LB. The tank LB should be enough mitigation to buy the healers time to pick up everyone and keep the run going and keep it alive. But going back here, so melee 2 has baited their cleave. The tanks are in position. Right now, we're going into Akh Morn's Edge. So group 1 to the left, group 2 to the right, and then tanks to the tail. And Thordan is telegraphing in. So we have to be inside the hitbox. And here's another note too, that's very helpful for the tanks. The way the red markers are set up are such that if you're a tank and you're standing inside the red marker, you're going to be outside of Thordan's hitbox. And it sounds very simple and basic, but I can't tell you how many times I've had tanks die because they forget that especially when they're positioned south where the hitbox doesn't, complete the circle. They end up dying because they're not inside when they need to be inside. So what you can do as a tank to help you with the positioning cues is if you need to be inside, just stand in front, stand north of the number one marker, or stand, in front of the alpha marker. If you're tanking, you need to be inside. As long as you do that, you're good. You'd be surprised how many tanks mess that up and get themselves killed. It's very funny and unfortunate. But we're doing Akh Morn Edge in. Tanks are positioning, group 1, group 2 are positioning. People are in the hitbox. And as soon as this cast bar finishes, he does the initial strike. And then Thordan is going to pulse the towers 4 times after the initial strike. So pulse 1, pulse 2, pulse 3, and you just see the party getting their shit wrecked right now. And pulse 4. It's a lot of damage. Like Solara, the Scholar, dropped to less than 10,000 health. After resolving Akh Morn Edge, we make preparations to do Gigaflare's Edge. There's some tank stuff that I'm not going over, but I'm gonna hold it until the end of the video because it's specific for tanks. So right now we're just chilling. We're hitting Thordan. Thordan is doing the baited cleave, so range 1 needs to make sure they're in. Then followed by range 2. And then we go into Gigaflare at the range 2 is baited, and the tanks have baited their cleave. On the healer side of things, for Gigaflare's Edge, make sure you understand what tools you're using because it is, yet again, a tremendous amount of damage. Thordan is casting possibly the worst pattern. It's Gigaflare's Edge in. And what you do for Gigaflare's Edge is very simple. So you saw the first AoE spawn. You mentally track where that AoE is spawning, and you're observing where the second AoE is going to spawn. In this case, for this Gigaflare, so AoE 1 spawns here, AoE 2 spawns here, and then we're gonna have AoE 3 spawns here. So what this just means is we have to position opposite to the first one, and because the 2 is on this side, then we're gonna move clockwise. We're gonna move to our left. So the call will typically be Gigas 1 in to the left, which just says it's Gigaflare's Edge. Thordan is telegraphing in because his swords are covered in ice. And I'm saying left because I observed the second AoE puddles to the right of us. So we have to run away from that puddle, obviously. If we go towards it, we're gonna die. So once again, the call would be Gigas 1 in to the left. And, once again, we have to be in the hitbox. So a special note for Gigaflare's Edge, and it's not super complicated. So I'm just going to draw this very, very quickly. The way I figure out how the spacing for Gigaflare's Edge is, remember that, the pulsing proximities are very, very painful. They're very lethal. So, you have to position so that you're not anywhere near them or as far away as possible from them. But in order for you to not mess up dying to proximity and also not dying to Thordan's in and out is looking at 1, we're going to be opposite to 1. So that much is simple. When Thordan is casting in, what I like to use as a visual cue is I use the outer hitbox string and I use the inner hitbox string, and I wedge myself in between those 2 rings to get me there safely. This is only in the case where, like, we have to resolve in. If if Thordan is telegraphing out, it's simple. You're just outside the hitbox. You're just out here. You're not anywhere near there. If you're positioned beyond uh the second inner hitbox screen, you are very likely, if you're not a tank, going to die to proximity damage, because the fall off of the lethal proximity is very, very aggressive. Like it'll just straight up kill you. You're not going to survive unless like you get extreme mitigation out, which is not worth it. So once again, we're going into Gigaflare's edge. Thordan is telegraphing in and out. So it's Gigas 1 in. And it's at this point, while he's doing his telegraphs, that I'm paying attention, like, okay, there's the first pulse. Where's the second pulse? I tilt my camera to face the pulse, and then I'm like, where's that second pulse? All right, it's to my right, so we're going left. And then making sure that we're in the hitbox. As you can see here, the Dark Knight's at risk of dying because they're frantically trying to keep it together. And it's the same deal. On the snapshot, Thordan will do the in out. And here's the in. We take damage from the first pulse, and look how low we already dropped. It's a lot of damage. And so the healers, you're just GCD healing through this shit. If you try to agree to cast, you're trolling. You have to heal this shit because it hits so fucking hard. And so you see us moving left to avoid the blast from the second Gigaflares. And it's at this moment right here, going into the second blast, that our 2 minutes go out. So our 2 minutes are out. Second blast. Keep healing this shit because it fucking hurt. And then we move opposite to the third and final blast. And dear Lord, this is scary sometimes, especially when support and DPS miss mitigations. So here's a problem, right? Is like people put out their single target mitigations too late. I think the myth missed the mitigations missed the snapshot by the looks of it. And so because the myths fell off before that third hit, we almost fucking died. It was so painful. Thankfully soil kept us alive. And so here's a very important note. After doing this merry-go-round, most of the party is here. The tanks have about 8 seconds to reposition, such that they're in position to bait Thordan's cleave. So what the responsibility of the main threat, whoever's the main threat in the given moment, it's the Gunbreaker. The Gunbreaker has threat right now. The Gunbreaker has to make sure that they're not on top of their co-tank and they end up on a red marker. It does not matter which red marker, but they need to be on a red marker. And more importantly, yes, there is a red marker right here that's closer to the Gunbreaker. It would make sense for them to take it, but the party is already close to this red marker. You do not want to put the party in a position where they have to flex. It's easier for one person to flex versus 7 people. So the Gunbreaker needs to go to 1, and then the Dark Knight needs to make sure they're not on top of the Gunbreaker. That's all that needs to happen. It's very simple. You have 8 seconds to do this. You have a lot of time, but you do need to make sure you, as main threat, you're on a red marker, because Thordan will repeat the cycle. He's going to go into the second cycle for Exaflares and Akh Morn and all that good stuff. It's at this point, after resolving the fucking hell that's Gigaflare's edge, Healer 1 is going to go in the hitbox. And as you can see here, the tanks are repositioning. Once again, making sure that they're not on top of each other. So tanks are in position, Healer 1 is in position. And you'll see it too in the real-time playback. How much time the tanks have to reposition. But you got to make sure you stay on that red marker. So Healer 1 is baiting cleave. We're going to move this along. Healer 2 is moving in to bait their cleave. I, as Healer 1, am getting out of there so I don't get myself killed. And then that's it. That's pretty much all of P7. If you can do this like 2-3 times without error, and you know you maintain good uptime, you get your 2-minute up, you're set, because we're gonna repeat the same process. So this is Exaflare 2 in. Same deal. Pop sprint, go to the light. Just do the Braindead dodge. It's just easy. It's simple. You don't lose a lot of damage. It's safest. At least I would advocate for it. And so, snapshot, go to the light. Then we go into the second safe spot. And what's nice about, you know, positioning Thordan on a red marker and facing him in such a way is that this movement's very consistent. Sometimes it's a little more precise because of the configurations, but it's very, very consistent. Melee 1 and the tanks already have to be booking it and making it in. So you see the tanks are hauling ass. And then melee 1 gets cleaved, followed by melee 2. And then we go into Akh Morn 2. This is Akh Morn 2 in. So what's different about this Akh Morn and Akh Morn 3 is Akh Morn 1, we will have group 1, group 2 split. For Akh Morn 2 and Akh Morn 3, what we're going to have is, using this as an example, we're gonna do what's called 611, and it's just fancy talk for how the party is gonna split up. So the way 611 works is, um, the non-tanks, they're gonna take Thordan's left tower. One of the tanks is gonna be soaking a tower by themselves on Thordan's right. This tank is gonna kitchen sink. Please consult the mitigation schedule, because depending on the tank compositions, you know, there'll be a different set of tanks taking this tower for Akh Morn Edge too. And then the tank down here is going to invuln. This tank is going to invuln. The healers need to make sure no one drops dead damage, because the tank kitchen sinking is going to get hit pretty hard, and also depending on the type of invuln that the tank on the south side is having to work with, it'll either be very easy to keep them alive, or it'll be, if it's a warrior, you best better heal them to full after the last hit, so that they don't die to the cleaves that come up at the end. But this is 611. It's very simple. Okay, so going back to the VOD. So it's Akh Morn 2 in 611. We see the Gunbreaker positioning, and we see the Dark Knight positioning. And once again, I really do have to emphasize this, because I see too many tanks messing this up. Here is the red marker. It's in. So that means the Gunbreaker has to make sure they're in front of the marker. If the Gunbreaker is sitting inside this marker, they're gonna get hit by the out, and they'll very likely die. And then the Dark Knight is over here. They're gonna take this tower, and then we're taking the left tower relative to Thordan's positioning. So we're gonna let it play out. Akh Morn 2 in 611. The Gunbreaker has invulned near the end of cast. The Dark Knight is kitchen sinking, and then the healers are healing. So it's the initial strike, and then instead of 4 pulses, it's going to be 5. So here's pulse 1, pulse 2, pulse 3, pulse 4, and pulse 5, the 5th and last pulse. Every subsequent Akh Morn Edge just adds 1 more pulse to it. We have range 1 coming in. Make sure the tanks are very healthy, because they're about to take their cleave. So range 1 is in. Beat this along. Range 2 is in. And then we go into Gigas. So we're going into Gigas 2. It's going to be Gigas 2 out. So very cool. So we need to make sure we're outside the hitbox, pay attention to where the first one the first pulses. So it's Gigas 2 out, moving to the right. Gigas 2 out, moving to the right. Once again, we need to mitigate because this ship really hurts. The healers are doing nothing but GCD healing for this sequence because if you start creating flare or royal cast, there's a good shot people are going to drop dead to damage. The many times that I've done this sequence, I just am GCD healing, and sometimes I even save Swift if I don't like the timing of my GCD respective to the damage going out before the next snapshot. See, I threw out Swift here 3 for moving into position to avoid the last blast. Holy fuck, this hurts a lot, even with proper tools. And then healer once going in. And once again, you know, as I said earlier, most of the party is here. Main threat just needs to go to a red marker, preferably not trolling and avoiding the party. And so main threat's gonna go to alpha. We have a lot of time here. Like exiting Gigaflares, there's a good amount of time to work with. So the Dark Knight is main threat. Gunbreaker is moving into position. I, as healer 1, in position to bait my cleave. Boom. And so here comes the Scholar as healer 2. Remember, as main threat, sit on that red marker so that we properly bait Exaflares, and it's Exa 3 in, and we're popping sprint. Thordan really liked this pull. He kept telegraphing in. It's a pop sprint. It's free. It's easy. And we're going to do the Braindead movement yet again. Nothing changes. It's just the same exact movement. We go to the light. Then we do the Braindead movement. And once again, as soon as we do the second dodge for the snapshot, tanks and melee 1 have to book it. Get in the center. Unfortunately, our red mage tried to do some fancy footwork and it got them killed. And my Swift is down, and so is the Scholar. The Scholar has to like typically get shields out, so they'll often pop Swift to get an advo out for Gigas. So we're going into Akh Morn 3. We're just waiting for this next set of cleave. We really need that red mage because they have to bait their cleave after we're done soaking these towers. So it's gonna be Akh Morn 3 in 611. And we're going into a 2-minute right here as well. Bear that in mind. So this is also why it's detrimental that the red mage died, because I believe once we take the initial hit, it's a 2-minute. So we lost a lot of damage already. And so it's the first strike, followed by 6 pulses. 1, 2, I'm gonna speed this up. 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then range 1 has to bait. And I believe, yeah, the machinist is range 1, so they're able to bait. And look how low the Dark Knight is as well. The healers can't pick up the red mage because both healers have Swift down, and we have to make sure the tanks survive the cleave. That Dark Knight is dangerously low for my liking. I Swift a Medica 2 because I'm prioritizing keeping the tanks alive. And it's right here. We make a decision. The red mage is rest, and they're coming up. And we're behind on damage. So what we opted to do is we opted to have melee 1, the ninjas sacrifice themselves. So the ninja's going in. The ninja's going to die, guaranteed. For the second cleave, this was range 2's bait. So the ninja dies, and then we get melee LB out. and we go into Enrage. If you find yourself in a scenario where you have to do Enrage Sequence, the setup is very simple. So once again, Thordan sets up 3 towers, one to his left and right. Typically, you will have both healers, healer 1, healer 2, and tank 1, soak the first tower. And what you'll typically see is healer 1 will generally take the tower to the left, healer 2, the tower to the right, and tank 1, the tower at the bottom. What you need to know about these towers is when the first strike lands and these 3 people die in the tower, the telegraph for these tower spawns do not reappear. They're invisible. So what needs to happen immediately after soaking the first set of towers on Enrage Sequence, range 1, range 2, and tank 2 have to immediately, and I say immediately, like as soon as these people drop dead, these people already need to be moving into the towers to soak them. If you sit there and you're waiting to see is it gonna telegraph? Is it gonna show me where the tower is? It's already too late. The run is done. So the instant these 3 people are going to die, range 1, range 2, tank 2, you already need to be moving to stoke the next pulse of the tower. And if your DPS is so far behind, you know, for the second set, it's basically gonna be up to melee 1 and melee 2 to kill the boss before it's over. So going back to the VOD, we did have that little snafu where range 2 had died and they're barely getting picked up because Swift was down, and melee 1 sacrificed themselves. So we're going into a raid sequence for Akh Morn Edge, and the healers and the tanks are taking a tower position. I'm already casting, so Solara did me a solid and moved into the tower on the northwest by the looks of it. No, they're trying to move into the tower, but I bullied them out. And so we call for the melee LB. And something that's nice to know about melee LB on P7. Melee LB3 will do about 3.1% of Thordan's health. As you can see here, he has less than 3%. So that melee LB3 is going to kill Thordan, and we're going to be done. We're going to meet the check. And so the melee LB is going out, and these towers are telegraphing, and they're going to enrage very soon. We have a body in each tower, so that's what's important. We have both tanks and a healer, and there we go. We kill Thordan. Now, the thing about Morn Edge that you absolutely need to be aware of is look at the animation of the tower spawning. There's a very key piece of information that's shown to you that is not immediately apparent the first time you see this. So looking at this tower, one would reasonably think, okay, to soak this tower, I need to be here. Cool. Now, what the tower is also showing you, but you may not catch on immediately, is the blast radius of the tower going off. The soaking has to happen in here, but the blast radius of the tower going off is actually much larger. It's about yay big. So what I'm trying to say is if you are not supposed to be soaking a tower, you cannot be anywhere near these towers, because if you are, if like you're sitting right here, you have a very good shot of getting cleaved by that tower and dying. Ideally, you need to wedge yourself well between the towers or sit dead center in the hitbox to avoid getting cleaved by the towers going off. So, once again, we're going into Enrage Sequence. There's no more damage going out too. Out of bad habit, just because I lose track of the timeline at the very end of the fight, sometimes I get a heal out, but there's absolutely no more damage going out. Everyone needs to be hitting the boss. You have to be hitting him and trying to kill him as fast as possible. In our case, we had the healer, I'm sorry, the melee LB3 and Thordan was below 3%, so we were fine. But you can see how quickly this derailed because somebody died earlier the fight. And unfortunately the healers are strapped for resources. Like every resource is planned out for the healers, and there's not a whole lot of flexibility that the healers can do um to try to pick up someone that's dead. Now, the main thing I will go over for the tank POV is, let me see here. As a tank, you know, I shared earlier that your responsibility is to make sure you end up on the red marker. Um, and you need to make sure that you position well enough so that you avoid cleaving the party with the bait. So so as a tank, your main job's positioning. As long as you position accordingly, you know, everything's gonna be okay. I'm currently scrolling back so we can see the start of P7 because I wanna talk about the Voke, the timings for the Vokes happening. So at the start, we have Thordan appear. Both tanks have to have stance on. Both tanks have to be on the red marker on top of each other. Thordan does not cleave. So both tanks establish threat, and tank 1 typically takes Thordan by just making sure they're top threat. We go into Exa 1 in this case, and so we do the dodge, right? We pop sprint, we resolve the mechanic. As a tank, regardless if you're tank 1 or 2, mentally, you already need to be thinking about booking it to the other side of the hitbox, away from the center so you don't cleave the melee that's also positioning dead center. And as main threat, your job is to sit on that red marker and tank 2, what you're waiting for is to see the next major cast. So as tank 2, once you see the major cast happen, is when you can Voke. Because as tanks, you have to manage the cleaves. You don't want to get too many stacks of light or too many stacks of dark, because each subsequent strike is going to hit you harder for that element. So we're soaking the towers. The dark tank 2 is main threat, and tank 2 is preparing to take the cleaves. So the swap happened on the cast bar earlier. So just make a mental note of that. And so once the cleaves are done, then it's tank 1's job to Voke. We're going into Gigas. It's gonna be Gigas 1 in, and then tank 1 has Voked. So again, you can use the major cast bar as your signal to do the Voking. And remember to shirk if it's necessary too. Gigas 1 in, and we're moving to the left. Then I'm actually gonna play this in real time so the tanks can see this happening. So this is the last pulse. Healer 1 in, and then tanks are in position. This is really critical. Um, Main threat, in this case tank 1, has to be on the red marker in order to not troll this, and then there's a swap right here. So tank 2 is main threat now. And then we go into Exaflares, and then the tanks are booking it. Tank 2 is positioning on red marker. Tank 1 is just waiting for that cast bar to happen. All right, cool. The cast bar is up, and we're getting in position. We're going to take the pulses. And then tank 1 has Voked, so tank 1 is main threat now, and tank 1 is on a red marker. Cool. Just gotta make sure you're not on top of each other. Bait your cleave. And we're going into Gigas 2. Tank 2 is Voking. Gigas 2 out to the right. Okay. And we're moving along. Still healing. Healing through the damage because it's fucking hurt. Cool. And then it's healer 1 with tank 2 as main threat. Healer 2 in. This is really important. So after coming out of every Gigas, you know, it's gonna be tank 2 is current threat. Tank 1 has to Voke, but not yet. What you're waiting for as a tank coming out of Gigas is the main threat should be on a red marker, and then you have to wait for the cast bar to happen for Exaflare. If this Gunbreaker Vote, and the Gunbreaker knows what they're doing, but if this Gunbreaker Vote and Thordan spins, there's a risk of Thordan spinning and starting his cast for Exaflare, and now Thordan will be off center. That's gonna, unless people understand, fundamentally how to dodge Exaflares, this is gonna freak out people. It's gonna throw them off their game. They're gonna get themselves killed, and it's gonna be a wipe. So, as a tank going into Gigas, you have to wait for that cast bar, and I'll voice it out. So Exa and then Voke happen right now, and then bam. So you're really only voking on the major cast bar. You're not voking any earlier, because if you do, you could put Thordan off center and kill the party. Then we're going into Akh Morn Edge. Dark Knight is now main threat. Tank 2 is now main threat. They voked on cast. This is the last Akh Morn's Edge, and then we go into Enrage Sequence. So we're going range 1's baiting. Range 2 is supposed to bait, but the ninja sacrifices themselves as melee 1. Then we go into Enrage Sequence. There's no more damage going out, just kill the boss. And then that's it for the tanks side of things. Do review your mitigation schedules, just so that you understand that you have your kitchen sink when you understand when you need to have your kitchen sink up, when it's your turn to take your solo tower when you're not invulning for 611. As long as you do that, you're gonna be fine. So for this final segment of the video, I'm going to do real-time callouts for P7. And it's nothing too complicated. This phase is not complicated. What ends up happening for people is they just get nervous and they lose track of the timeline, and it's a mess from there on. But from here, we're going into Enrage Sequence on P6. The dragons are gonna die. I'll start the calls now. Party on 1. Heal. Hold mitigation. We're going to wait for the second bleed to fall off. Hold mitigation. Heal. When this bleed falls off, party mit now. Okay? Tanks on alpha, make sure stance is on. Tanks on alpha, make sure stance is on. Party south. Exa 1 in, pop sprint, go to the light. Melee 1 in. Melee 2 in. Akh Morn. Akh Morn 1 in. 332. Heal. Range 1 in. Range 2 in. Gigas. Gigas 1 in. to the left. Gigas 1 in to the left. Heal. 2 minute. Pot. Healer 1 in. Healer 2 in. Exit 2 in. Pop sprint. Go to the light. Melee 1 in. Melee 2 in. Akh Morn. 611 in. Range 1 in. Range 2 in. Gigas. Gigas 2 out. To the right. Gigas 2 out. To the right. Healer 1 in. Healer 2 in. Exa. Exa 3 in. Pop sprint. Go to the light. Melee 1 in. Melee 2 in. Akh Morn. 611 in. Range 1 in. Range 2 in. Enrage. Melee LB3 when able. And then that's it. That's DSR. The only last super duper note that I have is if you're a caster, earlier during Gigas 2, I made a call for pot in 2 minute. On Gigas 1 after the second pulse. If you want, as a caster, when we go into the second 2 minute on Akh Morn 3, you can use that as your pot window. Reason being is because we're just sitting there, we're not really moving anymore. We're holding position. And you can just cast freely. Like you'll be okay. And it's okay if you put your pot on that second window just to make it easy for you. Yeah, that's all of DSR. I'm going to make one more video of just callouts starting from the beginning of DSR all the way through P7 just to have the callouts in one concise video. But hopefully this has been a helpful resource. I do know I have some issues with enunciation and I speak a little slowly. The speaking slowly is deliberate just to help people absorb the information. I mean, you can always speed up the YouTube videos to make this faster, honestly. But as I've said over and over throughout the video series, please study your mitigations. If you do not mitigate properly, people will drop dead. And I hope that you are successful in DSR. But I hope you have a good rest of your day.